when a black SUV with a fake HOA decal crashed into Kevin Marshall's garage. It wasn't just property that was attacked. It was his family's safety and peace of mind. The imposters behind the wheel, confident and intimidating, twisted authority into a tool for fear and destruction. But Tyler, Kevin's 13-year-old son, donned homemade body armor and stood resolute in the driveway, turning courage and clever planning into a powerful stand. Just wait to see how this tense confrontation unfolded, and how justice finally came down in their favor. It started like any ordinary Tuesday morning in the quiet suburb of Maplewood, Illinois. Kevin Marshall had the familiar sense of routine as he pulled his reliable sedan into the driveway of his modest two-story home. The morning sun cast soft shadows over the manicured lawns, and a faint breeze rustled the leaves of the maple trees lining the street. Tyler, his 13-year-old son, had already jumped off the curb, backpack bouncing, waving goodbye before turning toward the school bus. Kevin felt that familiar tug of pride as he watched him go, imagining the day ahead of him. It was one of those mornings that felt calm, safe, almost ordinary. That illusion would shatter in an instant. As Kevin exited his car and set the keys down on the garage ledge, a deafening crash sliced through the air. It was the kind of sound that made a person freeze mid-step, a violent interruption of normalcy. Kevin spun around, heart hammering, his eyes locked on a black SUV, lodged partially into the front of his garage, the metal frame groaning under the impact. The garage door hung jaggedly, splintered wood jutting out like broken teeth. Concrete dust and small shards of wood littered the driveway, and a faint, acrid smell of burnt rubber filled the air. Kevin's mind refused to process the scene at first. What happened? How could this be real? Then his gaze caught the decal on the side of the vehicle, a logo almost indistinguishable from the official HOA emblem. Sleek letters in a circle implying authority, organization, and order. His blood ran cold, and then it boiled. It was impossible yet undeniable. Someone had impersonated the homeowners association. Someone had deliberately driven into his property, wielding a false sense of power, brazenly challenging the very rules that should protect neighborhoods like Maplewood, not terrorize them. Kevin's fists clenched instinctively, the knuckles whitening, and he felt a heat rising from his chest, hot and unrelenting. Shock gave way almost immediately to anger, raw and consuming. Memories of every HOA notice he had ever received, most harmless, a few bureaucratic and mildly irritating, flashed through his mind. None of them had prepared him for this, not even the most absurd threat about lawn edging or mailbox placement. Here was a stranger misusing authority, turning it into an instrument of intimidation and destruction, targeting him, targeting his home, his sanctuary. The audacity was almost incomprehensible, yet it was painfully real. Kevin's neighbors had begun to emerge, drawn by the sound of destruction. Faces pressed into windows, children peeking from behind curtains, elderly couples stepping cautiously onto porches. Whispers of confusion and concern rippled across the street. Kevin felt the weight of public scrutiny settle on him, as if this moment demanded more than just private indignation. It demanded a response. He could feel the invisible line between civility and rage stretch taut inside him. The SUV driver or drivers did not immediately emerge, only the faint hum of the engine idling inside the twisted metal. Kevin's anger intensified, not just at the physical damage but at the calculated arrogance it implied. Someone had planned this. Someone had targeted him and his home, confident they could act with impunity. Each second of hesitation made the injustice feel heavier, pressing down on his chest with an almost tangible force. Tyler, oblivious to the full scale of the disaster at school, would come home to find his father's carefully maintained garage shattered. The thought of explaining the scene to his son gnawed at Kevin, fueling the fire of indignation. The anger wasn't just about property. It was about the violation of safety, the betrayal of the implicit trust that neighborhoods like Maplewood were meant to provide. The sense of personal violation gnawed at him. Kevin's hands shook slightly as he examined the damage, cataloging the dents, the broken wood, the misaligned frame. Each mark was a declaration. We do what we want. We can bypass the rules. We can scare you without consequence. The audacity made Kevin's blood burn hotter. He could not stand for it. This wasn't just about a garage. It was about respect, security, the right to live without fear in one's own home. The injustice was blatant, absurd, and outrageous, and Kevin felt it in every fiber of his body. By the time the first faint sound of sins reached the horizon, Kevin had already resolved almost instinctively that this would not go unanswered. Anger, sharp and potent, had transformed into determination. Whatever steps lay ahead, filing reports, confronting imposters, demanding accountability, he would take them. The shock of the morning had ignited a spark, one that would not be extinguished until justice was restored. Even before Tyler returned home, Kevin knew one thing with unshakable certainty. Someone had crossed a line, and the world, at least this corner of Maplewood, would feel the consequences. The frustration hit Kevin like a second wave, sharper and heavier than the first. After the initial shock of seeing his garage destroyed, he tried to engage with the so-called HOA officers who had emerged from the black SUV. They were men in pressed shirts, sunglasses reflecting the morning sun, each exuding a practiced confidence, the kind people cultivate when they know they are untouchable. Their smiles were thin, almost mocking, and their eyes carried the kind of cold certainty that made Kevin's blood pressure spike. He took a deep breath, hoping to reason, to appeal to whatever shred of professionalism or honesty might remain. "Sir, this is my home," Kevin said, his voice firm despite the tremor under the surface. "I've had no violations. Nothing justifies this." One of the men tilted his head, studying Kevin like a specimen, then spoke in a voice smooth and deliberate. According to HOA records, you've accrued several fines. Failure to comply with neighborhood regulations has consequences. Mr. Marshall Kevin's jaw tightened. Records? You're not even from the HOA. You're imposters. The man smirked. Call it what you want, but the rules are the rules. The audacity of it left Kevin reeling. Each word they uttered felt like a hammer striking against the walls of his patience, breaking him down piece by piece. He glanced at Tyler, who had appeared at the end of the driveway, backpack still slung over one shoulder. Eyes wood and uncertain. The 13-year-old's small frame seemed dwarfed by the looming figures, and the sight tightened Kevin's chest. How could these men, these strangers, show such brazen disregard for decency and safety? The anger that had flared earlier transformed into something heavier, a deep, gnawing pain. Tyler shifted from foot to foot, a knot tightening in his stomach. Watching his father, normally calm and measured, turn red with fury was almost unbearable. He could see the tight lines around Kevin's eyes, the way his fists clenched, the almost imperceptible quiver in his jaw. Tyler's mind raced, questions tumbling over each other. Why is this happening? Why can't anyone stop them? Are we safe? Fear wrapped around him, dense and stifling, leaving a sense of helplessness that made it hard to breathe. The world felt suddenly unfair, a place where someone could misuse authority and break into a family's life with impunity. By the time the men finally left as casually as they had arrived, Kevin's frustration had turned to exhaustion. The damage was not only physical, splintered wood, dents and debris, but emotional. The violation of their home, their sense of safety, had left an invisible scar. That evening, Kevin sat at the kitchen table with forms and pens, the hum of the refrigerator a lonely backdrop. Filing a police report, each line he wrote was a bitter acknowledgement that justice might not come swiftly. He described the incident, detailed the vehicle, the decal, the conversation with the imposters, but each word was weighed down by the slow-moving machinery of bureaucracy. As the hours passed, the realization sank in that authorities would respond in their own time. The investigation would drag on, and in the meantime, their home, their sanctuary, remained marked by intrusion and fear. Tyler, sitting quietly at the counter, tried to focus on homework, but his thoughts kept returning to the driveway, the black SUV, and the men with smug expressions. His fear mingled with helplessness, a bubbling mix that refused to settle. He wanted to act, to defend, but his age and circumstance left him constrained. Kevin noticed the anxious energy radiating from his son and tried to offer comfort, though he struggled to reassure himself. "We'll get this sorted," he said, voice steadier than he felt. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the situation wasn't resolved. It lingered, a shadow over the home that made every creak of the floorboards and knock on the door feel ominous. As night fell, the quiet of Maplewood felt hollow. Street lights cast long, uneven shadows over the driveway, now marred by broken fragments and tire marks. Kevin could still see the imprint of the SUV in his mind, a symbol of authority misused and safety violated. Tyler, lying in bed, stared at the ceiling, imagining all the ways someone could come back, imagining the helplessness that had already settled in. The injustice wasn't just inconvenient, it was a piercing reminder that even ordinary lives could be disrupted by cruelty and deception. Pain, Kevin realized, was not just about property. It was about trust shattered, the certainty of home and neighborhood compromised. And for Tyler, it was the dawning awareness that the world could feel dangerous even in its quietest corners. Together, father and son sat on the edge of this pain, their frustration and fear coiling like a storm waiting for some chance, some spark to turn it into hope. By the time the sun reached its afternoon high, a quiet shift had taken place in the Marshall household. Tyler, his usually calm and reserved demeanor replaced with an intensity born from weeks of simmering fear and frustration, moved with purpose. The basement, once just a storage space filled with old boxes and exercise equipment, had become a makeshift command center. Here, Tyler sifted through the remnants of survival gear he and his father had collected for a local preparedness course. Padded vests, reinforced gloves, goggles, and a sturdy helmet. His hands lingered over each item as if selecting weapons for a battle he had long imagined but never expected to face so soon. Finally, he settled on the body armor. A carefully crafted set of plates and padding that he and Kevin had designed together. It wasn't real military-grade equipment, but to Tyler, it represented protection, preparation, and control. He slid the armor over his shoulders, adjusting straps with meticulous care. Next, he picked up Kevin's old AK-74 replica, a training model lightweight and harmless in function, yet commanding in presence. Tyler had studied it carefully, memorizing every feature. He understood its limitations. He knew it was symbolic, not lethal. But the sight of it in his hands made him feel ready, focused, and determined. Downstairs, the walls were lined with diagrams and notes, sketches of the driveway, angles of approach, and potential escape routes. Every detail had been considered. Tyler had a plan to reclaim a sense of safety and authority to confront the chaos that had invaded their lives. He moved with quiet confidence, assembling his tools of defense with care, his mind sharper than ever. The fear that had once pressed down on him like a heavy weight was now tempered by purpose. When Kevin pulled into the driveway, expecting another ordinary afternoon of frustration and slow-moving police action, the scene that greeted him stopped him cold. Tyler stood in the driveway, fully armored, shoulders squared, chin lifted, the AK-74 replica cradled like a shield. The boy who had once spent hours buried in books now exuded an unexpected presence, commanding, unyielding, and determined. Kevin's heart skipped. This was no longer just a child. It was a sentinel, a protector of the home, a statement of resistance in the face of arbitrary cruelty. Across the street, the neighborhood seemed to lean forward, drawn by the unusual display. A few residents had already stepped outside, drawn by curiosity, concern, and a sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. And then almost immediately the impact of Tyler's presence became clear. The black SUV that had caused so much pain earlier now approached cautiously, its passengers hesitant. The men who had barged in before, expecting submission and compliance, now recoiled at the sight. The tiny figure in body armor, wielding the replica as though it could challenge their authority, shattered their assumptions. The arrogance that had carried them through the morning's destruction faltered in the face of unexpected resistance. Tyler's gaze swept the street, sharp and steady. He did not need words. The stance, the armor, the quiet intensity, all of it spoke volumes. The impostors hesitated, glancing at each other, uncertain. Kevin, standing in the shadow of the house, felt a flicker of relief ignite in his chest. The helplessness of the past days, the slow crawl of the investigation. The nights spent worrying over security, these were not gone, but now they were matched with hope. The spark of resistance embodied in his son's courage was tangible. Voices from neighbors carrying mobile phones confirmed it. Some had already called the authorities, reporting suspicious activity and the earlier attack. The tension that had once suffocated the street now hummed with anticipation. Hope, fragile but real, began to take root. For the first time since the attack on their home, Kevin felt that action could create change, that justice might not be delayed indefinitely. Tyler's determination had transformed fear into possibility. In that moment, the driveway became a stage for courage, preparation, and moral clarity. The ordinary suburb, once a backdrop for routine life, had become a proving ground for vigilance and resolve. And for Kevin, watching his son, pride mingled with relief and the faintest trace of awe. In the middle of Maplewood, a 13-year-old had sparked a turning point, reminding everyone that even in the face of deception and intimidation, hope could ignite action. And perhaps, finally, lead to justice. By mid-afternoon, the quiet tension that had hung over Maplewood for days began to lift. The distant wail of sirens grew steadily louder, and then the unmistakable flash of police lights reflected off the pavement. Kevin Marshall stood at the edge of the driveway, heart pounding, watching as the authorities arrived in a coordinated sweep. Officers moved with precision, assessing the scene, speaking into radios, and approaching the black SUV that had so recently threatened their home. The impostors who had arrived with bravado and certainty now found themselves frozen under the weight of real authority. Within minutes, the men were taken into custody. The officers read charges aloud: vandalism, impersonation, and intimidation. And the impostors offered nothing but awkward silence, their earlier confidence replaced by the stark realization that their carefully orchestrated plan had failed. Kevin's hands trembled slightly, half from relief, half from the residual adrenaline that had coursed through him since morning. The vehicle was impounded. Evidence was documented, and the neighborhood, which had been tense and uncertain for days, began to exhale collectively. Kevin turned his gaze to Tyler, standing still in the driveway, still fully armored, still holding the replica AK-74. The boy's posture remained steady, a testament to the courage and resolve that had carried him through the confrontation. Kevin's chest swelled with pride, a wave of emotion so intense it was almost overwhelming. His son, so young, had faced an impossible situation with intelligence. Calm focus and moral clarity, Tyler had transformed fear into action, hesitation into purpose, and his bravery had shifted the balance of power. Kevin stepped forward and pulled him into a firm embrace. "You did what I couldn't," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude and awe. Tyler, usually reserved, allowed a small smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the responsibility he had shouldered. The garage itself, though damaged, was repairable. The broken panels, the splintered wood, and the dented frame could all be restored. But Kevin knew the emotional weight of the past days. Fear, anger, helplessness could have lingered far longer if not for Tyler's intervention. The courage displayed by his son had not only protected their property, but had also restored a sense of dignity and control. Where uncertainty and frustration had threatened to overwhelm them, hope and decisive action now prevailed. As neighbors began to emerge from their homes, whispering in clusters, Kevin noticed something remarkable. Maplewood wasn't just talking about the incident, they were talking about Tyler. Conversations revolved not around the SUV or the damage done, but around the bravery of a 13-year-old who had refused to accept injustice. Parents shared the story with their children. Children shared it with their friends. The quiet suburb, usually so orderly and predictable, had witnessed an example of courage and quick thinking that resonated far beyond one driveway. Tyler's stand became a symbol, a reminder that even in seemingly ordinary lives, extraordinary action could occur. The incident sparked more than just conversation. It inspired a subtle but tangible sense of community vigilance. People became more aware of their surroundings, more willing to support one another, and more confident that wrongdoing could be challenged with intelligence, composure, and courage. Kevin noticed the small gestures, a neighbor checking in, another adjusting their home security, a few stopping to thank Tyler with quiet admiration. The lesson was clear. Bravery and moral clarity could restore order even when circumstances seemed absurd or unfair. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Maplewood rooftops, casting long shadows across the street, Kevin and Tyler sat together on the porch. The weight of the day's events settled gently over them, replaced by a calm sense of accomplishment. The house was safe again. The imposters were held accountable, and the community had witnessed something remarkable. Tyler's actions reminded everyone watching that courage is not defined by age, size, or experience, but by the willingness to act decisively in the face of absurd cruelty. For Kevin, the emotional resonance was profound. His son had become more than just a child in his care. He was a beacon of hope, a living example of the strength that resides in ordinary people when faced with injustice. And for the people of Maplewood, the story would linger long after repairs were made, a story of intelligence, bravery, and moral courage that turned fear into action and inspired a community to stand united against wrongdoing. In that quiet suburban street, life would return to normal. But the memory of courage, the triumph of hope over fear, would endure, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the smallest sparks of bravery can light the way for everyone.